New York. However, very exciting stuff. At least I think it's very exciting stuff coming to Ziti TV today. If you're not familiar with OpenZiti, it is an open source zero trust overlay network. Hopefully you've seen it before. Hopefully that's why you're here. Hopefully you've heard of BrowZer before too, because today on Ziti TV, we're going to be taking a look at BrowZer, and we're going to be taking a look at Keycloak. Now, we've had Kurt on Ziti TV before. Kurt, the inventor and prime developer, cool term, I might use that, of BrowZer. We've had him on before to talk about how BrowZer works, and we've seen it work. And if you followed the documentation that's out there, you'll see that it used to work with, or it does work with Auth0, but Auth0 is not very self-hostable. At least I don't think it is. But what is self-hostable is this thing called Keycloak. And so we're going to take a look at BrowZer, what it is. We're going to take a look at Keycloak, how it works, and we're going to configure our BrowZer instance for Keycloak. If you have any questions along the way and you're live, feel free to tap them in the chat. And if you haven't liked and subscribed and shared the video, now's the time. All right, let's go ahead and just get right into it then. Let's go and play with BrowZer. First thing we're going to do is find our documentation page. So let me bring that onto the screen. And it's awful small, so let's embiggen it. All right. Oh, yeah. Also, don't forget to give the project a star. If you have the moment, go on over to GitHub and give us that star. If you haven't enabled BrowZer, you can come out to our doc page and you can go to, actually, let's go back to the landing page. You go to documentation, you go to quick starts, and you go to BrowZer. It just talks a little bit about BrowZer right now. If you haven't seen it or heard of it, shows you what it is, tells you all about how to configure an authentication policy, all that sort of stuff. What we're going to focus on is this example enabling BrowZer. And so I made a video way back in the day that you can go ahead and step through that whole video and see how it happens. You can also just read the doc. If you're going to go do this, just one thing, do notice one important exception. You really do need to set server certs before you run your OpenZiti quick start. If you don't do this, then Ziti is not going to be set up for BrowZer, and you're going to be frustrated. So make sure you do that. Why are we doing this? Well, let's take a look at why. I have a docker.whale out here, right? So out on my virtual machine, I have deployed BrowZer. I deployed OpenZiti as well as Xerox too. If you haven't heard of Xerox, you should check that out. But I've also deployed on that machine a really simple web server. And the whole idea of BrowZer is to make those web applications easily accessible for people in a zero trust way without the need for installing a client on your local computer. This way, if you want somebody to access your resources safely and securely, you can simply send them a URL, tell them to log in, ask them for, say, their email address. As the operator of the OpenZiti overlay network, you can go through and add their email address to your user accounts. And then as long as that user shows up with the correct email address from an IDP of your choice, then things will succeed. And that's what we're going to see. And so you'll see I have dockerwhale.clint.demo.org. And so when I go here, the first thing you're going to notice is I've been redirected to, this is the default Keycloak login screen. This is what you see. Oh, if there's anybody out there who knows how to customize Keycloak and make it look different, let us know. Like, that would be a great way to contribute back to the open source project. Show us how to configure Keycloak so that you don't see this ugly theme. Oh, okay, I'll take it back. I'm sorry, Keycloak people, not ugly. Default theme is what I meant. I want to be able to, I want my Keycloak to look the way I want it to look. And maybe not know that it's actually Keycloak, other than the fact that it says Keycloak right in the URL. But that's, this is my demo. So you can see I've actually enabled GitHub on my Keycloak. So I can go ahead and click on GitHub. And because I've already gone through this process before, I'm going to magically do IDP OAuth. So this is just followed the PKCE flow. My Keycloak IDP went to GitHub, checked my browser for its cookie, verified it against GitHub, did that whole dance, and then came back to browser, and browser did its whole dance with the Keycloak IDP, and we get hello world from the Docker Whale hello world. This is one of my favorite web examples to use because it's so simple, right? But if you, oh, actually, let's go back and look at this. If you follow the enabling browser guide down here, let's look for where is brozac? Install the Ziti admin console, create a browser env, try it out, protected by browser. Where is the word brozac in here? I don't know where I put it. I probably put it inside of this. Yeah, so this little guy right here. Let's go back and find where it gets set. Ziti browser service, right there. So this browser service is used to create a virtual host on the Ziti browser bootstrapper that allows you to protect your ZAC, your Ziti admin console, using browser itself. So we can do a slightly more interesting demo by going to brozac.clint.demo.openziti.org. And when I do that, again, you'll see Keycloak. Hey, Keycloak wants me to authenticate to, this case, the Ziti admin console. Remember, it's protected by browser. So all these services you go through the IDP for, and then you even log in to ZAC after that. So you can obviously think maybe someday we'll be able to use browser to forward your authentication to whatever is on the back end. I've never done that. I don't know if it would work, but you could see a world where this automatically logged you in someday, assuming that's possible. You can see I've logged in here before. Actually, let me make it bigger. I've logged in here before. Notice the IP address. So this is a very easy thing to get confused, I think. When you create an OpenZiti overlay and you offload data from the overlay, the offload point is always relative to where it's offloading. For me, I'm sitting here in Western New York. This server is sitting in Ohio, I think. And so on that server in Ohio, I have my Ziti controller, I have my Ziti router, and I have my Ziti console. And so what I need to do when I access the ZAC, I don't give it the external address of ZAC. I mean, I could go to zac.clint. I do believe I left this out there and open. Was it 9443 or 7443? I thought I left this out there and open. Well, we can come back to that. Instead of giving it an external address, I can give it the internal address. And so if I go over to the machine that is where this whole demo is, you'll see the IP address is 172.31.11.231. And so over here, I'm logging into 172.31.11.231 on port 8441. So this offload of the ZAC is actually relative minus it's actually relative to where the ZAC is running itself. And then this gets even more confusing if you're inside of Docker. So if you're inside of Docker, you can't use localhost. You have to use, say, the host name, or you have to use a fully qualified domain name or something that's actually routable outside of Docker. And I only mention that because we're going to be using Docker, and it can get a little bit confusing. A diagram will usually help. So let's go ahead and log in. I think it's no, it's not admin. There it is. And so here I have just logged into my Ziti console. I have used it to tell ZAC to offload to basically localhost, but since Ziti console is actually running inside of Docker, this is why I brought it up, I have to give it the host name. So it's actually going outside of Docker and back in again. Maybe I should have had a diagram. And so there's ZAC protected by browser. If you go to brozac plex.clint.demo.openziti.org right now, because who knows if this will still be running by the time you try it. But if you go there right now while it's running, you'll be able to get the Keycloak authentication page. And so one more demo before we get into the nuts and bolts of what we're going to go see. We had a user out there ask about Plex. They wanted we've demonstrated Plex working before, and so I wanted to see if I could get Plex to work. I don't know much about Plex, so I don't know how to use it. I don't know how to push the buttons, but we'll see if we can get Plex to work. And so we have plex.clint.demo.openziti.org all running on the same machine currently. And so here we are. We have Plex, and we can scroll down. We can see some stuff show up, and then some of these things were having streaming problems for me before, but some of them were working fine. So we just pick one randomly here. I don't want to show too much of it. I don't know if I can. I don't know if you can hear it either. Like I tried to share the desktop audio, but here's Plex running through browser, running out in Amazon land. I'm not going to turn this thing off. How do I turn it off? And there we go. And so that's what we're going to do here today. So if you don't quite understand what exactly is all happening here, we have a server. That server does listen to on the underlay. When you see some documentation from OpenZiti, or if you read some of our blog posts, you'll hear us talk about dark services, where your server is dark to the world, meaning it doesn't have any exposed ports whatsoever. In fact, maybe I can bust up a real quick PowerPoint to demonstrate this. In fact, I don't want to use PowerPoint. I want to use Visio because it looks a little bit better. Let's see. I did one recently for Minecraft. Let's see if I can show that off and use that. All right. So here is an example of what we're talking about with OpenZiti itself, not so much browser. But we can adapt this for browser, because instead of zrock, we'll turn zrock into OpenZiti. Okay, well, just follow me. And instead of Minecraft, let's get rid of Minecraft, and let's get rid of this. And instead of that, we're going to put, let's say, Plex in here. We're going to make this bigger. That is way too small. And so instead of this Minecraft server running out here, so if I can get it, delete it. Instead of zrock, delete it. Instead of this, so we've got our server. I called it always on just because it's deployed out in the cloud somewhere, some cloud vendor. In my case, it was Amazon. And then we have the browser bootstrapper. And the browser, oh, come on, you can do it. There it is. And so the browser bootstrapper is listening in the world somewhere. It's listening, like I said, out there in Amazon land. So actually, let's make this go here. I guess it'll look a little bit better. And so my computer, your computer, whatever, we're going to go through the browser bootstrapper in order to get the Plex. And basically what's going to happen when that request goes through the browser bootstrapper and gets to Plex is the browser bootstrapper is going to modify the HTML that comes back on the fly so that your computer here and your browser, let's make a browser. What would you use mine? I use Brave. So we'll say Brave browser with an S, not a C. So my Brave browser will then get deployed from the bootstrapper a pile of JavaScript. And that JavaScript knows how to contact an OpenZiti edge router. And so if I get an edge router like this, put it over here. Let me save this as something else before I ruin my nice diagram. We'll call this ZDTV Jan 12. I just don't want to screw up my Minecraft diagram. And so there's a router out there. In fact, my router runs over here. And let's just get rid of you and my friends, because we'll say they don't exist just for simplicity's sake. And so my browser is actually going to connect to this router. And this router is what offloads to Plex. And actually, while I'm here, come on. Wow, okay. It's gonna be one of those. Click, there we go. We can put Docker. Come on, make it bigger, because inside of Docker now, how do I do the sort of at the top? because inside of Docker is actually where my my Zac is running. And so we saw Zac running before. We saw the docker.whale running before. That's also running inside of Docker. But Plex I actually installed outside of Docker. So I'm going to leave Plex where it is, because really what's going on here is after the bootstrapper is done doing its bootstrapping business, this is actually what ends up happening. So you'll make a request to the browser bootstrapper, to brozac or to docker.whale or to Plex, for example. And then once you've made that request, the browser bootstrapper mutates your HTML page, replaces it, and says, hey, listen, you're going to make a connection over here to the zero trust overlay network. I'm going to go to the Ziti controller. I'm going to get a certificate from OpenZiti, because the only way you can communicate over an OpenZiti overlay network is with a strong identity. Again, zero trust. And so what will happen is that browser does all that dance for you. All of the, there's like 4 or 5 components to browser that does all this, gets that certificate, but it's all in your browser's local resident memory, permanent identity, not like what you would have with, say, the ZD Desktop Edge for Windows, which looks like this. This has a permanent identity on my computer somewhere. With browser, you get your identity via the IDP integration. So when you come out here and you go to docker.whale, now one more thing we're going to show you is that this right here should tell me to log in again, because my authentication token times out so quickly right now, which is cool. We're going to change that timeout too. But you can see I had to authenticate again. Every time I want to get there, if my token is not valid, it's going to go do that whole dance. And you can see, it adds a tiny bit of authentication latency, but once it's authenticated, things are totally and utterly as though you're just using something on the internet. And you'll see something like this where it reloads and does the thing. We go back to GitHub, and we go back to brozac. That's stuck. Refresh. Live demos. That's interesting. I'm getting authentication failure from OpenZiti now. I might have just stumbled onto a little bug. Let's go back and do a hard reload and see what happens. Well, maybe I'll have to show this to Kurt, because I am getting a 401 unauthorized. I shouldn't be getting that because I do have a bearer token. I did authenticate. Sometimes that's the wrong button. Sometimes you got to give browser a kickstart when you're doing things like this. Let's try it again. I should get this. Yep. Did I turn it off? Like, did I turn something off here? I don't know. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Okay. All right. Something interesting to show Kurt. Let's go ahead and log back in again. And you'll see, when I click on these things, like, you would never know that this is not just regular internet, right? Like that, as I click, it goes. You can see my identity here. You can see the router's identity. And that's basically what we'll do. All right. So there's 20 minutes of overview. If you're not interested in, how to go do it, you don't have to watch from here on out. Just wanted to demonstrate browser working with Keycloak and how it all works. So now let's go ahead and do it. In order to do it, I think it works best if I just turn it all off and turn it all on again. So if you're interested, I have a mountain of bash scripts that I have created. You can go check them out if you're interested, but this is basically what I'm going to do. I have this whole set of scripts at this location, and I'll say temporary location of pile O bash. There you go. I put a chat out there so that people can go and take a look if you're interested in taking a look at these scripts. But you'll see there's one install script and there's one cleanup script that call other scripts. So let's go ahead and just cd to git, cd to my name, and cd to scripts, and cd to Ziti, zrock browser. All right, and so now I can run the cleanup script. It's just going to go through and delete all the things, and delete all the services. This is just noise, right? Like it's all cleaning itself up. You don't have to run that. You could run reinstall if you want. There is a reinstall script, but there's also an install script, right? So I'm going to do reinstall. Just it'll do the cleanup and then it'll do install. Oh, it takes a parameter. Yeah. So so very helpful. I like it when I leave myself a reminder. You do need to create a environment variable or environment file that let's see this. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to let it go and then I'm going to talk about it. You need to create an environment, basically a big answer file that that you need to follow. And so if you come out here and you look at the nvars template, these are the sort of things that you need to do. You're going to need a wildcard certificate, right? Browser just requires that anyway. You're going to know your external DNS. In my case, it's clint.demo.openziti.org. You're going to want your Ziti password, your zrock administrator password, your keycloak administrator password, your keycloak username, your realm that you're going to create. And then I think most of the other stuff is all defaultable. You can go through and look at it. And it will install one vhost example by default. And I don't think, yeah, it uses docker.whale. I don't have it using Zac or Plex, but Zac is what I want to change this over to. So by the time you watch this, that docker.whale might say Zac. But this is the answer file that you need to do. And what it will do, these scripts will go through and you can see it's kind of going through and doing its thing now. So it has gone out there. It has destroyed my entire environment. It has deployed the OpenZiti overlay network. It has deployed zrock. Again, if you haven't seen zrock, maybe we'll look at that after. It has deployed or is in the middle of deploying browser, and then it keycloak as well. And so you can see right now, the script is waiting for keycloak to come online. After keycloak comes online, it's going to do a whole bunch of stuff, configure your keycloak environment. We'll take a look at that here in a second too, because that's really why we're here, right? We want to see how can we make browser work with keycloak. And then we'll take a look at some of the common problems that people have had and some of the easy ways to go about debugging those particular problems. So it says it's now configuring keycloak for OpenZiti in browser. It creates a new realm. It creates a new client so that it can accomplish the PKCE OAuth flow. It then modifies the client and adds redirect URLs. So the IDP will only succeed if you have the correct URLs. And that's why I wanted to show that whole process off. And then it'll make the brozac and it'll make the docker.whale, and we're done. At this point, even though you wouldn't know it, I have a whole brand new environment that just got created. So I can go back to docker.whale. And notice Google has also been added. So keycloak has this. Actually, let's log into keycloak first. So keycloak has this. You'll see there's a Ziti realm. Keycloak has this great federated identity provider option. So you can come down here and click on identity providers. And you can see the little script I showed you will actually create the GitHub OIDC flow and the Google OIDC flow for you. We can take a look at that as well. It's relatively straightforward. Nope, not that. All right, fine. OpenZiti scripts. Where is it in here? Okay, OpenZiti scripts. Right there. And so that's done. The configuring of keycloak is done by this browser configure keycloak script. You can see it makes a function called kcadm because it'll execute all of these commands inside of the scope of the Docker container. It'll do that for you, which is really nice. It also adds the project name and gives it, this way when you go to Docker, and not Docker, and you do a PS, Okay, let me do docker ps. No, let's see, alias docker ps. I had asked ChatGPT to create for me a very simple command that I could use to get a shortened docker ps. And apparently I have forgotten that alias. There it is. So alias docker ps equals this docker ps. Much better, a little bit smaller. So you can see it's got a name of browser DC. I don't remember what DC stands for, to be honest. It stood for something. It runs the Ziti console in browser, the bootstrapper. It runs Keycloak. This PKCE tester you probably don't need. This was one of those problems I was referring to that people were having. And then the Docker whale. All that stuff is running inside of this. This script emits all this and pops it out for you. And if you were to run it, let's look at what that browser dc.yaml looks like. And so this is a Docker compose file. I'm sure you've seen them before. You can see we're running Keycloak up here. It runs as root. And the reason why it runs as root is because I'm lazy and I didn't want to figure out an easier way to use Let's Encrypt. So Let's Encrypt, when you get your wildcard certificate, they're going to be owned by root. And figuring out how to not get them owned by root, I know I cheated, right? So you shouldn't run it as root. Keycloak runs as a different user. You can, if you've got better Docker foo than I have, another way to help out, tell us, put up a recipe and show us how to use Docker and Let's Encrypt in an easier way. But that's why it's running as root. You also see the Ziti console runs as root for the exact same reason. Both of those containers, when they ship out, run not as root or rootless. And so you need to go out of your way to make them run differently if you want to access these files. Anyway, you can see my Keycloak. Oh, well, you could probably log in now. You know my Keycloak admin, and you need my Keycloak password. So no, I guess I'm going to change that. But then we have the command to start Keycloak. We run the bootstrapper. And then here's the magic of the bootstrapper, this target array. This is where you define what the incoming URL will look like, what Ziti service, the browser bootstrapper, the browser bootstrapper will dial. And then you configure your IDP. And currently you have to know that you're using an IDP type of Keycloak, but I'd like to see us make this universal so that this is not necessary, but it's necessary for now. And then your realm, what realm you're going to log into. In fact, I probably should make 2 realms. That would be kind of an interesting demo. But you can see you can have multiple realms in your Keycloak if you want, which is super cool. Down here, the whale I run, this is the image that I run. You can see it runs exposed on port 2000. That'll be relevant in a moment. It goes back to the whole Visio. It goes back to this whole thing right here. When you're running inside of Docker, you sometimes have to do things that you wouldn't expect. For example, the router does not run in Docker. So I have to expose port 2000 so that the router is actually able to connect. Let's do this. Come on. Connect to the Docker whale in this way, right? So some port has to be exposed in Docker land in order to let me get through Docker and into Zac or into the whale. That's what 2000 is exposed for. That's why the Ziti console has a couple of ports exposed. And I don't have plex. I have plex running outside, not inside of Docker. And so that's what the Docker compose file looks like. Again, if you go and read those scripts, I know it's a lot of bash, but really you can just copy each line and do each line, or you can just run the whole thing if you want to learn how to run the M file. And it does all of this. So that's what the Docker compose file will end up looking like. And now we need to go back and look at when we go to Docker whale. So this Docker whale is going to go and it's going to say GitHub or Google. We were looking at Keycloak before. So let's go back to our Keycloak. Oh, good. I have this right here. Good. So we have Google and Google OIDC and GitHub enabled in the examples. I wanted to show where that happens. So it's, yeah, it's right here. So you'll log in to Keycloak. You'll create a realm. It'll create a client. You can see it creates some valid redirect URLs and some valid web origins. If I go back to Keycloak and click on clients and click on this guy right here, you can see all of these are the same things that are emitted during the create step. I couldn't find a way to update the client without getting the client scope ID first. So you have to run KCADM to get the client that you're interested in. And so it gets it, and then it sets the full scope allowed to false. So this is one of those things that's really easy to get wrong. When you go to clients and you go to your browser bootstrap client and you go to client scopes, if you click on the dedicated scope and then you click on the scope button, you have to turn this full scope allowed off. That's because the audience, it adds an audience that you don't particularly want. And so you just turn off the full scope, and that will slim down the token that gets sent to OpenZiti. The token that gets sent to OpenZiti uses a feature called external JWT-signers. The external JWT signer that you set up, which we'll look at in a minute, it needs to know what the audience is that the token is intended for, because Ziti will verify that audience. And if you get that audience wrong, you will see the dreaded, this user needs to be authorized on the overlay network. So that's one big gotcha. We had that particular problem. Somebody had that particular problem where the audience flag did not match in Ziti, how it was configured in Ziti, and how it came from Keycloak. Remember, the way the PKCE dance is going to go, your browser or my browser is going to contact, oh, we don't have Keycloak. So let's add a Keycloak to our always on server. Keycloak. So your browser is going to contact the Keycloak server and say, this user is asking to log into someplace. Can you log them in? And then that's when you'll get this screen asking you to log in. Once you successfully log in, you can either use the federated identities or make a username of your own. In fact, we can do that. We should do that. If we have enough time, we'll do that. So Brave Browser contacts Keycloak. Keycloak sends back to Brave Browser a bearer token, an access token, a token that says, here's your token that you can then send somewhere else and will verify. And that somewhere else is actually the Ziti controller. And so I'll put, actually, let's go get the controller because that little label is helpful too. So there's the Ziti controller that also is out here. Group them together and put them down here. All this stuff's running on one box, so it's going to get busy. Hopefully not too busy. So your browser will go out and it will contact the controller. Come on, we can do this. There we go. There we go. Got rid of Xerox. All right. So the browser will contact the controller and say, I'd like to authenticate. So if you look over at, where's my dev tools? So we can open dev tools up like this, and we can look at our network, and we can see somewhere, actually, let me go ahead and authenticate. Do this, we'll do the GitHub dance. The very first time, it'll tell you your email address. So now you know my email address too. Fantastic. And then let's see, we watched this and we gotta come through. We gotta do a different dev tools apparently. Let's do this and we'll refresh this and come back over here. Okay, let's dump the whole thing. Let's see if we can get the /authenticate. Is this preserving the log? Yeah. What did I do wrong? Apparently, I declare all of this. Let's come back to network. There it goes. All right. So now it'll ask me to sign in again. Keycloak remembers that I've logged in before, so it only gives me two options, a password or GitHub the second time around, which is neat. So now if we come over here somewhere, we should see a /. Actually, if I type authenticate, Here it is. You'll see the browser made a request to Clint controller.clint.demo asking for authentication, trying to authenticate this user with the OpenZiti overlay network. In order to do that, it has supplied a bearer token as part of that external JWT provider sign-in stuff. And so that's what's happened right there. The browser, not with a Z, but with an S, tried to access something from the browser with the Z bootstrapper. The bootstrapper said, you're not authenticated yet. Go over here and authenticate yourself. It went to the IDP. The IDP said, are you who you say you are? The IDP said, yes, you're Clint. Clint, it says, okay, here's your bearer token browser with an S. Let's go back to the diagram. Here's your bearer token browser with an S. The browser with an S sent the bearer token to the controller. The controller looked at that bearer token, a JWT or a JWT, and said, is it valid? Yes, it's valid. Is it for the right audience? Yes, it's for the right audience. Fantastic. Then you're consider yourself authenticated. Here is your Ziti session ID. Once the Ziti session ID was delivered, the browser could then connect to the OpenZiti router. The OpenZiti router knows that Clint, the browser, has connected. And then when the browser dials the ZAC service, the traffic goes to the edge router, and the edge router offloads that traffic toward whatever the configuration was. So now that's a good time to look at, quote unquote, whatever the configuration was, because in these scripts too, you'll find the docker.whale example, and you'll find the brozac example, both of which look identical, right? You can't tell the difference here. The only difference is what the name of the service is and what the offload port is. So in one, the brozac, I want to offload to the Ziti console, and so I'm reusing that variable I had set before. In the docker.whale, I want to offload to the docker.whale, so I know that's port 2000, if you'll remember. This is also hopefully going to get easier, but this is basically all you need to do in order to share any service inside of an OpenZiti overlay network. You need something that looks like this. And so this is a real simple example. It shows you how to make two configs. One config is the intercept config. One config is the bind config or the host v1 config. You knit those two configs together to make a service, and then you authorize people that you and people that you want to be able to bind. And so that's why you'll see identity roles and binders. And so that's everything that happens there. And then along the way, if we go back and we look at the install, let's do this, the install of browser in here, not browser, install browser. One of the things you'll see at the very end, down where I create the identities. So I do make a couple of identities by default, one of which is me, Clint, and one of which is Kurt. And I did that just because Kurt and I were playing around with this at one point. But you'll see I add two attributes to that identity. One is docker.whale dialers. One is brozac dialers. These are all the things that I need to do in order to make this happen. It sounds like a lot. I know it sounds like a lot. Once you've done it a couple times, it's really not. Here, I'm authorizing my identity using an attribute. So instead of having to give every individual user every individual permission, I can give the users who match an attribute, Ziti's attribute-based access control, ABAC, not RBAC. Every user who has that attribute gets access to the services that I want them to have access to. So the people who can dial the docker.whale, the people who can dial the brozac, those are the people who are able to do those things. Again, zero trust overlay network, least privilege motifs. All right, so that's all. I think that's all of that. I don't know if there's anything I've missed in there. I'm probably glossing over some details. Let's look at what this looks like inside of Ziti, because once you're done, with installing everything, you'll have a file. This uses the quick start, so you'll have a file at your home directory in quick start, and then it'll be host name, and you can see my host name starts with an IP, and then it is host name.env. You'll have this file out there, and if you source that file, you can then log in, and you can do a Ziti edge list external JWT signers. Oh my goodness, we got to shrink that down because it doesn't look right. So let's run that again. And so here you'll see I have an audience of browser bootstrap client. I have a claim property of email. I have an issuer, and I have a JWKS URL. These are important, but you don't usually set them. I mean, you have to set them, but like you don't choose the value that comes from the Keycloak server. And so because I made a Ziti realm, that's where I get these things from. We could talk about that if you're interested in what JWKS means or what the issuer is. But the important one, audience, claim property. And so now we go back to Keycloak again. Come on, where's Keycloak? And inside of Keycloak, you can go into your Bootstrap client. You can go into your client scopes. You can go into your dedicated scope. Then when you're in here, it's client details, actually, I think. Ooh, let me find this real quick. I remember, oh, it's right here. I knew it was hidden. There's a nice, easy way that you can learn what's going to happen by clicking this evaluate button and then typing some name. What? This is a little clunky. I'm not gonna. That's really cool. Come on, let me select it already. Thank you. And then also in the UI, not very obvious, you can click on the generated access token. And this is where you can see your issuer, but more importantly, you can see your audience. This audience is set up back here in the clients, back here on the client scopes, back here under here, and under your audience mapper. And you can see if you follow that script, it uses the custom audience that I told it to use. These things have to be aligned. And if they're not aligned, then you run into troubles. And that's a common mistake. I made that mistake quite a few times when I was doing my own testing. Let's see. So that'll show you how to configure OpenZiti. It shows you the two things that are important. Oh, email claim. Yeah. So let's go back and look at the evaluate for that user again and go to the access token. And you'll see in this access token, an email will be not verified. Where's the email? Right there. So this token will come along with a claim or a field inside of the token. And when you map the external JWT provider, that claim or field has to be the same. There has to be an email field in your token. Obviously, you can see there is. It has to also be the right value. This is where we have to now look at identities. So if we look at my identity, you can see I have those attributes we talked about. But the other thing that's not so obvious, let me say where name contains Clint. I'm going to show the JSON. The reason I'm going to show the JSON is because inside of here, there is a name, but more importantly, there's an external ID that's set. Your external ID must also map to that email address or to whatever value you put in that claim. We can make this call, bananas. And so let's go ahead and make a new user. Let's make a new user. We'll add a user. We'll call it, let's see, I like test as a user. And we'll give it test, and we'll give it test, and we'll create that user, and we'll set some credentials. Test, save it. And so now I've made a user. I didn't give it an email address though. So we'll do test at test.com. And so there's my email address. And so now if I go back to the docker.whale, hopefully I'm not logged in, I hope. Still logged in. Let's go and log out. In order to do that, you've got to go to Keycloak realms, Ziti realm account. And then you can click sign out. So if I refresh, surprised that happened. Maybe it's just cached. Okay, so we'll do test at test.com with the password of test. And when we sign in, we should see the dreaded, the client needs to authenticate to gain network access, even though they just authenticated. So maybe Maybe when I talk to Kurt, we'll change that ID, that message, because it's a little bit misleading because they just logged in. But the problem is we don't have an identity. Ziti Edge create identity test at test.com dash external ID equals test at test.com. All right, so now if I list the test, you'll see external ID test at test.com. You can see my JWT. Go ahead and copy it. I'm going to delete the whole environment when we're done. So there's my test at test.com. But if I come here, I do, let me close this window and do the whole dance all over again. Test at test.com, test. You're going to see the same error. Hopefully, maybe you spotted what I didn't do, because I didn't on purpose. I didn't do a specific thing. Let's go. Oh, it's now waiting. So let's see if we got Docker logs, actually BC logs. It is taking too long. Make a new docker.whale. Okay. I must be getting an authentication error in here. I don't see. Okay, so it authenticated. Oh, this is interesting. So it doesn't work and it doesn't get an error, but it should have gotten an error, because what's going on here is you're authenticated and things are okay. But what I didn't do is I didn't give you the rights, or I didn't give the test user the rights to dial the Docker whale. So I have to do a Ziti Edge list identities, and you'll see my test user has no attributes. So if I do a Ziti Edge policy advisor, identities, you'll see the test user does not have access to any services. So I have to fix that. Ziti Edge, update identity, test at test.com, and we'll give it Docker whale dialers. Now when I run policy advisor, did I screw it up? Yep. Let's go and use the right attribute. Then do policy advisor. Now you see the test user can dial a Docker whale. And so if I come over to here and I dial my Docker whale, this should work. So I'm not really sure why it is being persnickety with respect to not completing correctly. Authenticate. Let's do this. Let's go through and clear site data. Perhaps having a couple service workers running is not the best idea. There we go. Cool. And so now, last thing we'll do on the ZDTV is we'll go in to my environment and we will create that plex example. And a plex server, you can see the only difference, I changed the word plex, I changed the offload port. Those are the two things that I've done differently. So I do need to source that plex file, and I do need to create the service. And I do need to update the identity, so the edge list identities, because none of them are going to have the plex dialer. So Ziti Edge update identity, and we'll also add plex.dialers to the test user. And now I need to edit the browzer.dc.yaml file, and I need to add a new target array. So I'm going to come in here just going to copy this. After paste, and then this is going to be plex, and this is plex. Oops. And I think yep, everything else is the same, all the same IDP, all the same information. I just added a new array, and now a little Docker compose magic, because for whatever reason I need to delete the container before I can continue. Restarting it was not sufficient the last time. So browser compose stop browser bootstrapper, browser compose rm browser bootstrapper, yes, browser compose up -d. Okay, and now bc logs. And I should see plex in here. Yeah, right there. I see it. Plex. Okay, cool. So now from that test user, if I come back over to here, I take out the whale, I add the plex. Now you'll get a keycloak error. I forgot. And that's totally understandable, totally expected, because for every new service you add, you have to add a redirect as well. And so let's go in and add plex to this. And let's go in and add the web origin as well. If you copy the brozac, it's the best one to copy, not the keycloak, because I see it's got a little tiny bug in it. All right. So now if I come back over to here and I go to plex.clint.demo, going to re-auth. That's expected. I bounced everything, so makes sense. And if everything works, I'm going to get plex here. I'm waiting for keycloak. The web server might be down. Did I turn it off? Did I turn it off, or did I screw up my offload via the service plex 32400? Oh. Where did I run docker ps? Did I have plex running? I thought I had plex running. Oh no, it's a system control. Sudo system sudo status plex media server. Okay, it is running. And what did I goof up here? It says the browser, it says that the web server might be down, but I don't think that's the case. What could I have screwed up here? Plex and plex, yep. Oh, I know what I screwed up. So not only do I have to grant the dialer the ability to dial the plex server, I also have to update the router with the same thing. It needs to be able to bind the service. Zex binders and plex binders. So I have to add the plex binders attribute to the identity that represents my router. Otherwise, the router is not allowed to bind the service. Makes perfect sense. Policy advisor. And so now this thing should be able to do plex. It can. And now if I go back and I do plex, there we have it. And so that's how you would add another service to your browser bootstrapper config. And with that, we're almost at the top of the hour. That's going to be our Ziti TV. I hope that it was fun and exciting. I moved fast in a lot of places. Hopefully it wasn't boring. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully I covered all the right stuff. If I didn't, contact us on Discourse. Give us that star on GitHub, because it really does help promote the project. And until next time, we'll see you.